You decided to tackle a new piece and you were so excited and you felt so connected to this piece and you pulled it out and you started learning it. You're pretty comfortable with some of the fingering and you know the notes, but you're not to that stage where you can play through the piece with freedom and fluidity and musicality. This is how you know that you are in the middle stage of learning a piece. And it can be a really tough spot to be. This stage where you know the piece fairly well, and when you try to play from beginning to end, there are pauses and maybe wrong notes or other mistakes, and you don't have that feeling where you can just play. So when you're in this middle stage, there are some things that you can do to help you get to the end stage where you can play the piece with freedom and flexibility and fluidity. And today I'm going to give you 3 tips on how to get there. Now, this last tip is something that I've never talked about on the channel, and it's going to blow your mind. So make sure that you stay tuned for the entire video. I'm also probably going to throw a little bonus tip in at the end as well. The first way you can practice when you're in the middle stage of learning a piece is to focus on transitions. This is one of the most common things that holds people back when they are trying to go from the stage where they are reading note by note to going to the stage where they are playing with freedom and musicality. Oftentimes when people practice, they'll start like always at the beginning of the piece. And even if you're doing a fantastic job of breaking things down and practicing like measure by measure or small section by small section, chances are you're not drilling just the transitions. So I'm going to give you an example up on the screen of a really simple little minuet. And you can see, probably even just by looking at this minuet, that the first 2 lines are different than the next 2 lines. So lines 1 and 2 are kind of part of one section, and then lines 3 and 4 are part of another section. Anytime there's a change like this in the music, either there's a repeat sign, or you're even just moving between 2 phrases that are slightly different, it's actually the very end of the first section and the very beginning of the next section that's going to be the hardest part. And people will make a big mistake where they'll drill the first section and they'll drill the second section, but then when they try to play through the entire piece, they get stuck because they can't actually play the transition between the 2 sections. So what you're going to do here is you are going to take the last measure of the first section or of the first phrase and the first measure of the last section or of the next phrase. And you're going to practice those 2 measures back to back. So you're actually linking the 2 sections of music together. Now you can do this anywhere in your piece, but practicing these transitions is going to help you be able to play from the beginning of the piece to the end of the piece with significantly less pauses and mistakes. The second tip for practicing when you're in the middle stage of learning a piece is to practice at half tempo. And people hate it when I tell them to do this because yes, it is hard, but you're gonna actually take the metronome and put your piece at half tempo. Now, what's gonna happen when you do this is it's going to feel really boring. It's gonna take a long time, twice as long, because you're playing it at half tempo, and because you're going so slow, it's not even gonna feel like a piece of music. Your brain might have a hard time recognizing what you're even doing. And oftentimes when I tell people to do this, they'll get started, it will be hard, and they'll give up. Don't do that. Do it at half tempo, and even though the first few times it's gonna feel really challenging, you might actually make more mistakes, I want you to stick with it. Stick with it to the point that you can play it a few times. It will get a little easier. And what happens is at half tempo, you actually have more brain space to think about more things at the same time. And so it's going to feel a little boring because it's half tempo. And the biggest complaint that I get when I have people do this is that it feels boring and it doesn't feel musical. And that's the point. You are going to work extra hard to make it musical at half tempo. And if you can make something feel like a piece of music at half tempo, not only are you going to be so much better at making it feel musical when it's up to tempo, you're giving yourself this playground where you create more space in your brain because you're going slower, so you have more time to think about other things. And it gives you a really good chance to practice inclusive awareness, where you are focusing on many things at the same time, but you're going at a slow enough tempo that you're not feeling overwhelmed by it and you're not making a ton of mistakes. It's a total game changer. Give it a try. The third way that you can practice when you're in the middle stage of learning a piece is something that I've never really talked about on the channel. And it's to practice shifting between the 2 mindsets required. So let me explain. When you are learning a piece, you have this mindset where you want to notice all of the mistakes that you're making. I talk a lot about this in the live events that I do. You have to be aware of those mistakes because you want to fix them. And you want to make sure that you drill the sections where you're making repeated mistakes. So you're not really letting anything go because you're being hyper vigilant and hyper aware of everything so that you can build a solid foundation from the beginning. When you want to play through a piece from beginning to end and you don't want to have those pauses and you don't want like little mistakes to snowball into bigger mistakes, it actually is a completely different mindset that is required. And the mindset that is required for that is the mindset of letting go, which is completely the opposite of what I just talked about. When you're in the beginning stages, you have to notice everything. You have to go back and drill stuff. You're not letting anything go. But as you go through the stages and you want to play through a piece and not pause and not have the mistakes snowball, you have to really work at the skill of not getting riled up when you play a wrong note, or not letting a small pause snowball into a big pause. And oftentimes when people are playing through a piece for the first few times, they're still in this mindset of trying to fix every mistake and trying to be aware of every mistake. And so as they're playing through the piece, they'll make one mistake and then they can't compute anymore and they do a big pause, and then maybe they even go back to the beginning and start again, or maybe it flusters them completely to the point of being able to get back on track. And so you have to shift your mindset. So you have your time during your practice session where you're practicing and you're drilling and you're not letting go of the mistakes, but then create time in your practice session to actually play through the piece and let go. You're shifting your mindset here. You're not letting anything stop you. Once you play that first note of the piece, you take deep breaths and you don't stop for anything. And it's a different mindset and it requires practice. So I highly suggest that you carve out practice time to actually shift your mindset consciously and work on letting go when you're playing through the piece so that you don't get hung up on the mistakes, and so that you play with less pauses and more freedom and more fluidity. Now, my bonus tip for you is something that you can do in the beginning stages of learning and also in the middle stages to help you get a really solid foundation so that by the time you get to the point where you're shifting your mindset and letting everything go, you have such a solid foundation that you just have less mistakes in this stage. And if you work in the beginning stages and the middle stages on building a really solid foundation, you'll find that when you get to that point where you're trying to play through with more freedom and musicality, it's just a lot easier and a lot smoother because you've built a much more solid foundation. And in order to do that, you can practice using layering. It's one of my revolutionary practice methods that ensures that you build that solid foundation. What happens when you start with layering is the middle stage gets a lot shorter because you're putting out a lot less fires. You have less mistakes to fix. You have less things that you need to overcome because you've really just slowly built this solid foundation from the very beginning. And so the middle stage is shorter and easier to overcome. Now I have an entire tutorial where I explain how to practice with layering, and you can go ahead and check that out right now.